Mr. Sampath Choda, Mr. Uday Kumar Verma, Mr. Jawad Sarkar, Mr. R.K. Sinha, Mr. Singh, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a very proud privilege to be associated with this conference and exhibition being organized by the Broadcast Engineering Society on convergence and new broadcasting technologies. As is the norm in government, ministers are usually given a prepared speech. So therefore, which is of course prepared by very eminent people, so we would take that as read. And I would confine myself to a few observations which I think might be germane to the deliberations which are going to unfold over the next couple of days. We heard a very insightful and a very incisive address from Mr. Sampath Choda, who gave us an overview of the information and communication technologies landscape as it would unfold over the next decade, both in India and abroad. And were I to try and add anything to that, especially in such an august gathering, it would possibly tantamount to preaching the scriptures again to the Shankracharyas. So I really am going to refrain from doing that. Less to say that it's a non sequitur that the broadcasting space in India has expanded exponentially over the last 2 decades. We've gone from one broadcaster in 1990, which Mr. Sarkar has the honor of leading, to about 850 odd television channels in the private space. We've had a proliferation in the radio space also. A large number of FM radio stations are playing 24/7 in almost all our major cities. And in the last 5 years, we've had this earth-shaking paradigm shift in terms of the innovation called social media. And from none, we've gone to about 5 to 7 crore users of the social media space, give or take whatever number that you would like to pick. Now, what troubles me essentially as a lawyer is that whether regulation has been able to keep pace with the march of technology. And when I talk about regulation, it is not that I am a control freak or government is a control freak, but for the ordered development or the orderly development of any sector, it is a prerequisite that there should be an enabling regulatory architecture, an enabling statutory architecture, which is able to keep pace with change as it unfolds and as it undulatingly applies itself to the lives of people across the length and breadth of the country. Change is always something which people find difficult to adapt. if we were to go back in time to possibly the early 14th and 15th centuries, when printing traveled from Japan, from China to Europe, and books started getting published, it created an uproar in the established order because the church felt that it was the ultimate and the only repository of knowledge. It led to the establishment of inquisition courts, all kinds of new terminology and new vocabulary came into the body of language. But as it is, eventually everybody realized the virtue of change and developed a certain comfort level with it. I do not think in the current context, as Mr. Verma was rightly pointing out, that anybody is really uncomfortable with change or is not acutely conscious about the fact that this is a change that we need to adopt and adapt and embrace in full measure. But how it is going to unfold over the next 2.5 decades as India pushes towards occupying its rightful place in the Comity of Nations as an emerging world power is something that we need to be acutely cognizant of. Self-regulation is the panacea in human affairs. And as a liberal, I tend to lean towards self-regulation by instinct. But what we need to seriously introspect about, that this democratization of the information paradigm, which Mr. Petroda referred to, what are the implications that it has on our social ethos, our social milieu, and our social mores as we know them today. And the reason why I seek to flag this concern is, while I have no difficulty when the freedom of speech extends even to the right to offend, I think the right to offend is something which is intrinsic to the entire paradigm of freedom of speech. But then there has to be a corresponding remedy to that. And that's why in the social media space also, and I had flagged this point a few months earlier before I was given this responsibility at a conference on internet governance, that we need to make a distinction between the right to privacy and the right to anonymity. Because while the right to privacy is something which is intrinsic and flows out of the mandate of Article 21, which guarantees us the right to life and liberty, the right to anonymity is something which can be corrosive to social order. And the reason why I chose to flag it at a conference of broadcasters is because a lot of it, and rightly so, advertently and inadvertently, has been enabled by the huge change in technologies which has taken place over the last couple of decades. Mr. Verma very rightly flagged a concern which has been uppermost in the minds of a large number of people about television rating points and the impact that it has on discourse as we know it. Mr. Petroda also very incisively pointed out to the lack of developmental aspects in the national discourse. We have been told that possibly it is the skewed revenue models which are really responsible for the sensationalism that we see in our discourse. And maybe digitization is the panacea that we need to look for in order to try and fix this distortion. While all of us remain committed to the process of digitization, because eventually this is the march of technology which is going to yield result, fruit and dividend for a very, very large mass of people, both in terms of access to broadband, but also more importantly in transforming singular discourse into a two-way discourse. But insofar as the problem of TRPs and its relationship to sensationalism is concerned, I think that's an issue which requires greater deliberation, it requires greater introspection, because the jury is really out as to whether it is because of a skewed revenue model or is it just an addiction that we as a society or we as a people have unfortunately got into. And that's why I often joke to myself that we've been hearing a lot about self-regulation over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, and it's a bit of an oxymoron because Parliament is a self-governing institution. The judiciary, over a period of time, and maybe rightly so because of the vacuum which was created in the constitutional space, has become a self-governing institution. The media resents any form of governmental regulation because they feel that wherever government really intrudes into their space, it is more of a predator than an enabler. And then of course you have what is colloquially known as the civil society, that self-governing or the self-governing paradigm is the way forth. But unfortunately everybody put together believes that government should be completely regulated. So therefore, I think maybe the time has come for us to really introspect whether government also needs to be given, held us in good stead over the past couple of decades, have fallen victim to a very conservative discourse, which is the complete anathema of, or which makes people risk averse. So therefore, I think for the larger civil society, for people in the public space, there is a need to really think that if government has to reinvent itself, if government is able to or has to be enabled to be able to deliver better services to the people, is it not time that government really needs to be given a little amount of flexibility and a little amount of latitude in order to recreate and reinvent itself? Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that we are at the cusp of a change which we possibly do not realize. 20 years ago, when the Iraq War was telecast on CNN for the first time, I remember people saying that technology is erasing borders. But 20 years later, the march of technology has been so all-pervasive that possibly in the next couple of years, it may have implications on the entire concept of Westphalian states as we know them. So therefore, as we go ahead and as we innovate and as we make the broadcasting paradigm all the more pervasive, all the more people-friendly, I think it may be worth the while of people in the broadcasting industry to also seriously introspect as to what kind of an enabling regulatory architecture, what kind of a statutory landscape do lawmakers need to put in place to enable that this change is both orderly and is eventually and ultimately constructive to the entire effort of national reconstruction in both the short term and the medium term. With these words, I would like to thank Mr. Sinha and all his colleagues for giving us an opportunity to be able to share our thoughts with you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and wish you a great conference.